Well, welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist live show that we do every single week, or at least as many weeks as we can. And we help try to break down really big questions of life into as simple answers as we possibly can. And one significant question that we're going to seek to answer today is how to reach Gen Zs and millennials. There are several significant hurdles that are in the way of reaching this group. They are the growing nuns, if you will. They are the group that is leaving religion at the highest rate. Now, that doesn't mean that they're becoming atheists. It just means that they don't associate or they don't claim to associate with any certain group that is religious. Sometimes they'll say that they're spiritual. Sometimes they'll say that they believe in God, but they won't say that they're a Christian or that they go to a certain church. And this is a significant issue for Christians and for pastors because we need to learn how that we can continue to reach millennials and Gen Zs. They are the generation that is my generation and the generation below me. So for those that might not know, as far as I understand, and again, these dates are always changing, but millennials, I think, are those that are under 40, and Gen Zs, I think, are those primarily under 30, maybe 25 and lower. Again, the dates are always changing. So if you were born between 1980 and 1990, they say that you're 1995, even they say that you are a millennial. If you're born kind of 95 or after, they would consider you Gen Z. And there are some significant hurdles that we are going to continue to try to work through and we're going to talk about. And if we miss any, you can go ahead and leave those in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts, but we're going to be looking at some information that came out from a Barna study that Christian posted an article on, and it was 5 trends that pastors need to be aware of when they're trying to do outreach to millennials and Gen Zs. And so we're going to talk about that today. My name is Tim. I'm here with the 1 Minute Apologist, Bobby Conway, the Dr. Bobby Conway. So if you watch
Dr.
us,
Squared.
yeah, Dr. Squared. If you watch us at all, you know what we're talking about. So Bobby's wrapping up his second PhD right now. Really excited for that.
Me too, bro. I got my oral exams next Monday.
Yeah, definitely. So be praying for Bobby as he presents here in late January 2021 to officially wrap up his second doctorate. So, man, there is so much going on in our culture right now. We sit on the verge of the inauguration of Joe Biden as president. There has been some significant unrest going on in our culture, and here we are talking about outreach to millennials and Gen Zs. And we're going to get to that. We're going to wrap some of that all together. But we wanted to go through this article. And the first one that they bring up in this article, and I'm just going to read it right from the article, is the younger generation navigating screen time wisely. And so we want to acknowledge right now that you are watching us on a screen. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for checking out this video. But Bobby, why do churches need to address the screen time issue? And then we'll maybe talk about what some things parents can do to address that problem.
Yeah, so according to the Barna Group, 86% of churches aren't set up, unfortunately, to help their millennials and Gen Zs know how to navigate screen time. And so when I saw this list, I found myself thinking as a pastor, what kind of a process can we put in place at Image Church to make sure that we address these issues? And we can talk about that at the end. I think it's important because these are, natives of technology. This is the iPhone generation. And so we want to be sensitive. We want to know what are the issues that they are facing as a result of technology.
Mm-hmm.
So even things like 13 Reasons Why, that Netflix series on suicide. And you can see things about bullying or rumors. Well, rumors and bullying can spread so much faster with screen time. I watched This Is Us last night, and I was catching up on an episode, and the girl put something out on social media, and the parents were so upset because you can't take that back. What you put on screen has a long future, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there are things that are happening. We know that kids struggle with insecurities and depression because they're doing a lot of comparison. And I think all adults for that matter could be lumped into this. So, what are the types of things that we need to be aware of? I think that we need to be having great networking that's done. We need to do a lot of communication. Trying to get millennials. We're talking about this at Image Church. If you want to reach the millennials and you're going to do that on Facebook, you're going to have a hard time. You need to have a good Instagram account.
Right.
So I think that just being aware that they're on Instagram, knowing how to communicate there, finding a millennial, a Gen Z that can, be communicating so you can communicate as a church
Right.
about what's happening. But I think helping them to navigate is really crucial.
Hmm.
How do you create proper boundaries? The social dilemma
Yep.
documentary that came
Yep.
out, it talks about how we are basically, uh, you know, in algorithm silos, and
We are.
basically Siri hears our conversations. I've turned Siri off on my phone because I don't want to be manipulated. I don't want to be blinded by an algorithm that I'm put into. And so that's why I think we're so divided
Yeah.
because of social media, and we're paying attention to our own algorithms. It's blinding us to see other perspectives. And so we have to help the emerging generation know how to be objective, to know how to see other sides, to not just be paying attention to their own stuff because they're in an algorithm. And we have to
Yep.
teach them how to have boundaries of what to watch, what not to watch, how much to watch, how little to watch. And they need to be aware of good apps that are out there that can help foster their spiritual growth as well.
So there are so many other great resources about screen time and looking at screens. I remember in the book "The Coddling of the American Mind" by Jonathan
Yeah.
Haidt, um, that he was saying that social media is essentially like a loaded weapon in the pockets of particularly female adolescents. That there is so much comparison going on, there's so much looking at other peers that they're trying to live up to, that it is extremely dangerous. And so when we're thinking about our identity in Christ, how can we address that particular issue when it comes to our young adults and our adolescents and teenagers?
Well, I mean, we do need to help our emerging generation, the students, understand that their identity is rooted in Christ.
Mm,
That is tough. That's tough for me as well. I mean, I think that's just kind of our human brokenness. We're created in the Imago Dei, but the image of God, while it's not erased, it is defaced. And so we have a fallen nature. It's in need of complete redemption and restoration. And in this sanctification experience that we are going through, like justification, we're declared righteous. In sanctification, we become what we're declared. Glorification, we get to experience the full fruit of what happened in justification.
yeah.
Well, in sanctification, we are fumbling our way toward glorification, and we experience lots of identity issues. And so we have to help the students understand what are your temptations to find your identity in: popularity, money, success, beauty. These are the types of things that can really run a person down. And
Yeah.
so, having that secure core, having that secure identity, I think churches that could even have identity courses for students to help them to dialogue this. Being aware of what our shadow is. We have shadows where we're tempted to find our identity. Like, my shadow is to find my identity in pleasure, right? In hedonism. And I have to realize that, the ultimate delight is in the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. But when you're struggling, when you're depressed, when you're anxious, when you're feeling insecure, if you're somebody who looks to pleasure, you might become an addict. I
Right.
think back to my childhood when addiction became rampant in my life. It was because I didn't have a good core identity, and I was finding my identity through pleasure, but the pleasure that I was finding was in alcohol, and eventually I became an alcoholic. So I think being aware of what your shadow is can help you put up some proper boundaries to protect yourself.
That's good. That's good. Well, again, we could keep talking about this particular issue and with screen time, probably for a whole episode. Maybe we'll do that in the future. But let's jump to the next
Sure.
one, and I think there'll be some common themes that will continue to come out here. The second one is the church must integrate its response to injustice into social media. Now, again, I'm thinking of a number of different people here, but I'm thinking of one group of people that is saying, Man, if
Let,
you're gonna
let me, I think number two is integrate your response to social justice, not in the social media, but in your ministries.
Right.
Is that what you
Yeah,
meant
in
to say?
student
Yeah.
ministry. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And student ministry. So I think we have one group of people that are going to look at this and say, man, you're sliding into that, critical race theory, kind of the wokeism thing. If you start to introduce, kind of this idea of social justice into your student ministries, and then it's just a quick step. You're right there, right? You're on the doorstep of that. And then you have the other group of people that are saying, man, why isn't the church addressing some of these
Yeah.
things? Why aren't they having conversations about racial injustice and what's going on in society and all those things? So we want to be mindful of kind of both of those groups of people and kind of try to create hopefully a path down the middle of
Yeah.
that. So how would you address some of those things? How would you kind of respond to maybe both sides of those? Because I hear those people in my ear already,
Yeah.
and maybe someone will comment here. But so how do we keep that in mind? How do we integrate this idea of justice and what's going on in our culture into our student ministries without kind of throwing the whole thing out or without ignoring it completely?
Yeah, so you'll get a couple camps, right? You'll get those that are really passionate about social justice, maybe to the exclusion of the gospel, and then that becomes the social gospel. And we need to avoid that because that's just philanthropy, right? I mean, that's great, do social justice, but we also believe in bringing the kingdom right now on earth as it is in heaven. The other extreme would be to avoid doing social justice altogether because you're fearful of being lumped in as a critical race theorist, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that bringing that hybrid of looking, what does the Bible say? I mean, the Bible does talk about, helping the oppressed. The Bible does want us to bring an end to racism, which, by the way, I think we can do our part and we need to do our part. At Image Church, we're wanting to plant a multi ethnic church as a way of doing social
Yeah.
justice and racial reconciliation. It won't be until heaven until racism is finally eradicated.
Right.
Nevertheless, the Bible's clear about taking care of the widows, about taking care of the poor. So, social justice in the Bible, there's not an option, but there's also not an option to not share the gospel.
Right.
And so, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing as it relates to social justice, ultimately, we want people to turn to the gospel because that is what's going to be the true hope of the world.
Right. No, I think that's great. So maybe give us some, as practical as we can, again, realizing that each context will be a little bit different,
Yeah.
ways that you could see keeping the gospel forefront, but also having an effect, some sort of practical effect for these students that are feeling like the church is missing this. Right.
Yeah. So I mean, it's astounding, but 90% of millennials and Gen Z, according to the Barna Group, say that racism is real prevalent in our culture, and then 75 to 68% of Gen Z and millennials want to be a part of the solution. And so I think if we're going to reach millennials, we need to recognize that that's noble that they want to deal with these social justice issues, that they want to help eradicate racism. The question is how do we do it? So many people are driven to social justice, but they're driven on a philosophy that's rooted basically in critical race theory, and critical race theory is rooted in Marxism. So that's not to say that you can't glean some important truths out of critical race theory. Like all truth is God's truth. But to
Right.
buy the whole system hook, line, and sinker, then you're going to put yourself at odds with the very gospel that you're trying to see people live out. So, what we need to do, Tim, is we need to make sure that we help people to understand philosophically and biblically why we're driven to do the social justice actions that we're involved in. And so a lot of people, they just watch culture, social media, right? We just talked about
Yeah.
this. So they're being formed into a philosophical bubble, and they're not challenging it. And so we have to make sure that we go back to the scriptures. Is this biblical? Is this biblical? So you take race for an example. What can churches do in this way? Well, if you're in a rural area where it's mostly Caucasian, you can still have, a guest African American pastor.
Right.
If you're in the city, come together and figure out ways to do things where you're coming together. And for people that feel overwhelmed, how do you bring black and white together
Hmm.
because of these, variegated issues and our differences? Well, That's where the gospel's so important, because we can really unify around the gospel. We might not always know how to unify around some of the perimeter, but at the core of the gospel, it gives us an antidote to communicating with one another, to understanding one another, to loving one another, and to going out and helping to be ambassadors for Jesus in the hope of reconciliation.
Yeah. I'm going to do two things. Number one, I'm gonna give a plug. If you're a pastor, if you're a Christian watching this, and you're saying, "Man, I'm scratching my head with what to do," like you guys are talking about this thing called critical race theory and woke. Maybe you've heard that term. The first thing I'm gonna ask you to do is we do have a playlist on our channel where Bobby and some guests kind of unpack some of these things. Kind of give an idea of what's going on. We've also done an interview with Neil Shenvi, who's kind of one of the leading voices in the Christian world about this. So I would challenge you to check out that playlist and understand some of that. But other than that, the second thing I'm going to do is ask Bobby, what as a pastor or a Christian who's watching this who wants to be informed, other than checking out that playlist, which is a great start, what is something that they can do to kind of just avail themselves of kind of what's happening and what's going on?
I think, for example, take your people. If you're a white pastor, invite your church one Sunday to go out and visit an African American congregation. Invite an African American pastor to preach at your church, and maybe you go preach at his church. We've done things in the past. In the first church I was a part of, a church plant back in Arkansas, we would have these worship swap nights where you had the African American team come over and lead us in worship, and vice versa. I think getting to know your local African American pastors, building relationships with the African American community, uh, being willing to listen to their story. It's easy for us as white people, and I'd say it's easy for African Americans to sit in our own bubbles and to assume the way that people think about things without getting to know each other.
Right.
And so for me, I'm so thankful. One of my best friends in the world is Brian Loritz, a very well known African American pastor.
Yeah.
Um, I'm thankful for African American friends that I have, like John McCrae.
Right.
I can talk to people and say, hey, let's chat about these
Yeah.
race issues. And so don't be fearful of the conversation, and realize this: we are going to be biased. If you're just an African American in an African American context, or you're a white in a white context, we're not going to become real well informed until we start doing some incarnational living together.
Right, exactly. Real quick, Darren, I saw that you said "love you guys, can't stay."
Darren.
Thanks for tuning in real quick and leaving us a comment. I do see that there are other comments. I can't read them all from the distance that I am away from the computer, so I apologize for not dealing with more of them. But let's kind of move on to the next one. I think this next one we do have a lot to say about this, and so maybe we'll spend a little bit more time on this one. Number three, the church must address issues of loneliness and anxiety in young adults. So, man, we know that this is so true, just particularly on the tail end of this pandemic. So maybe you could, you know, navigate us through some
Yeah.
of this.
Well, um, I'm a pretty anxious fellow myself. I mean, God has done so much work in my life, and I'm so thankful for how He's helped me. My wife and I do a lot of stuff on mental health. I think it's really important that the church figure this out. I think as it relates to anxiety, it's astonishing. I mean, you read in Philippians chapter 4, be anxious for nothing. And I think, wow, that's a tall order.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get anxious about everything, right? But be anxious for nothing. And I think that anxiety is something that we just need to state, I'm feeling anxious, and we need to talk about it. But we need to know what's causing our anxiety. So, how do you know if maybe somebody has a mental health issue with anxiety? Well, there's a lot of irrational anxiety for the person who struggles with a mental health issue with this area. There's anxiousness, like you just get triggered all the time, and you just feel like you've got a sea of swarming uh, feelings of anxiety that you just can't seem to correct, and that gets tough. And that's where seeing a doctor can be important, because there
Hmm.
could be a chemical imbalance where maybe you're not getting the serotonin or the dopamine uptake. And so that's where I think medication's always a last resort, but I think it is a resort, and it can help people. I'm no longer on medication, but I was on antidepressants for several years, and it helped me through a dark night of the soul. I'm thankful that I'm not on it any longer. I was able to do some of the cognitive work to help me to
Yep.
recognize some of my anxious triggers. But I think that the students getting together and talking about it, realizing the things that are causing their anxiety and putting boundaries up in our life to protect us from that. Sometimes we need to press into our anxiety. We need to go deep with it. Like, why am I anxious and why do I let that bother me? Because
Yeah.
behind anxiety is insecurity,
Yeah.
and behind insecurity is a lack of trust in God. And behind a lack of trust in God is, we're just trying to control our own world, and that doesn't work. And so we have to be able to know how to walk our negative emotions backwards to get to the source of it so that we can take Philippians 4 up on its other challenge. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and petition, present your requests to God. And the God of peace, who transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And I love that. The peace of God that transcends all
Right.
understanding. In other words, if we'll figure this anxious pill out and what to do with it, then there's a pool of peace that we can swim in
Yeah.
when we learn to trust God. And I think that we can dive in from time to time, but we get out. I just think that anxiety and these mental health ministries are so important. Tim, this might be a time for you to even mention our crash course that's coming out.
Yep. So that was kind of what we were leading up to. So last night, if you are subscribed to our channel, you saw that we released kind of our first video in a series that's going to come out about addressing mental health and kind of what Bobby just laid out. We released a video last night saying that the church needs to address this. And I won't say everything that he's going to say in the video because I want you to go check it out. But in addition to that video and these resources that are coming out, Bobby and Heather are doing a mental health crash course. So let me just take a brief second before we move on to talk a little bit about that crash
Yeah.
course. So that crash course is going to address a number of issues. Whether you are dealing with mental health issues yourself and anxiety, or whether you're a pastor of a church, or whether you're a youth leader, or maybe you're a college ministry director, it's going to help you kind of navigate some of those things. It's going to help you understand some of those things. And we're doing it in a unique way. We're actually going to release the course starting January 25th. So you can watch the introduction to that course now if you purchase it, but you can, on the 25th, each class will be released one day at a time. And then Bobby and Heather are going to be doing some Facebook Lives and a closed Facebook group for those people that have enrolled in the
Hmm.
class to kind of answer some further questions about that, to kind of get some more help and to just get some more clarity around that. Now, there is an option that you can just watch the videos and take the course, again, starting on January 25th without being in the Facebook group, and there's a different price point for that. But we believe that there is a very significant issue that is coming towards the church. It's already infiltrated some of the church. Barna has validated that with saying that this is an issue, and this mental health crash course that Bobby and Heather have put together is kind of one piece and
Hmm.
hopefully solving that.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm really excited about, Tim, is we've created study guide questions, and we want to see small groups going through it in the local church. Uh, at Image Church, mental health ministries is going to be a real key value of our church because we think in this COVID world, we think mental health issues have been there, but it's exasperated. Studies are showing right now that mental health issues have been quadrupled since the COVID-19 crisis.
Yeah.
Now, that's not for those who are still actively engaged in incarnational community with their church. The stats would be different, but we've created this resource for the church for student ministries to take their students through this, for small groups to take their small groups through this. And I really hope that this will be a great encouragement for people to get a vernacular, to get a language, to get it in your DNA so that you can really address this. I say this often. The church often makes everything a moral issue,
Hmm.
and the culture wants to make everything a mental health issue. It's not either or,
Right.
it's both and. Yes, sometimes mental health issues turn into moral issues. Sometimes it's just a moral issue that it's there. The mental health crisis, sometimes people are being excommunicated from the church, canceled from the church, and there's real mental health stuff going on, and they're further traumatizing people and reinforcing their mental health issues. And we need to throw a life vest out and say, there is a way for us to swim into the future that would allow us to be healthier in the way that we live our life.
That is exactly right. So if you are interested in finding out more information about that, the best thing to do is to go to oneminuteapologist.com slash um, MHCC, Mental Health Crash Course, MHCC, and you can find out more information. We did release a post on Facebook about that. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can go check out that other video that was released last night. There'll be another video that's released tomorrow. There's another video that's released Friday, and all of that is dealing with kind of some of these ancillary issues around mental health. But we really are driving people towards taking that mental health crash course, where you get a lot of more in depth and more kind of meat, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
with that.
Tim, let me say one last thing. We want to be upfront. I'm not a trained, licensed psychiatrist. I've got a PhD in life experience with mental health issues. I know what it's like to struggle big time with anxiety, depression to the point where I didn't want to be alive, alcoholism, drug abuse, all that stuff, and knowing how to navigate and seeing such victory. I just want to share that.
Right.
And my wife understands anxiety, and we've raised kids that understand mental health issues. We've fumbled as moms and as a mom and dad at times, just treating things as a moral health issue with our kids, when wow, we weren't seeing behind the big picture that they're really struggling with some mental health things. And by becoming aware, sometimes we're addressing our kids even on a moral level, and there's a mental health issue. And you know how freeing it is when you go, wow, and the rejection issues that they begin to collect when they just keep beating themselves up, thinking, I don't get what's wrong with me. I don't know how to
Yeah.
fix this. And God, where are you, God? And it's because we're treating them as if they've got this moral issue only, instead of being more holistic. And that's what we're after here. And I think that our life experience in this could hopefully prove fruitful. That's why we've done this.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, okay, we'll keep moving here. We could go
Let's do it.
on for that for a long time as
Yeah, it's
well.
a passion area.
Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, number 4 again in this article is the church must support and encourage resilient disciples to grow their faith. So I know that you and I have talked a lot about discipleship, disciple making. We know it is one of the chief things that Jesus has told us to do, to make and to be disciples. And so how can we go about doing that? And where do you think, maybe before that, where do you think kind of the church is dropping the ball in some of
hmm
this?
So I think that we need to really remember that discipleship is replication and multiplication. And while I've been taught that my whole Christian life, my eyes really feel open to the intensity of that call right now. And we need to recognize that if it's replication, multiplication, we need to ask ourselves, what are we replicating and what are we multiplying? And so a church needs a process for its Gen Z and millennials to know what the goal is. Like, so if a disciple is a learner, okay, well, who are we emulating? Well, Jesus, and he's our moral exemplar. And what are we trying to exemplify from the life of Jesus? From the head, the heart, and the hands. Social justice with the hands, heart, relationships, head, thinking theologically and apologetically crisp. We want to make sure that we are aware of a process that addresses head, heart, and hands. And so that's going to be life on life. And so what a lot of churches will do is they'll have sort of your go to your membership course, and then take another course on this is what growth is, and then this is what community is, and this is what evangelism is, and that's it. But it's got to be more incarnational. And I think that that's something that has been revolutionary in my own frame of mind, that we need to be able to give parents and students and say, look here, parents, we've got this process for your students that they're going to go through, and it's incarnational. And we recognize that before your child goes off for college, we want them to understand how to address these issues.
Yeah.
Robert Lewis, a mentor of mine who developed the men's fraternity curriculum, said, I was always parenting my kids with this picture in mind that one day they're going to go off to college, and I'm going to pack their U-Haul truck up, and we're going to load their trucks up full of stuff. But the question that really haunted me is, what are they really leaving with?
Right.
Like, what is the substance of my son or my daughter? And I think that our kids, they need questions addressed. They don't even know what questions to ask
Yeah.
at that age,
Yeah.
right? And so we need to be able to say, look, you're going to go off to college. Here's a worldview. Here's how you relate to the opposite sex. Here's how you make good decisions. Here's what a leader does
Right.
and what doesn't do. Here's what your gifts are. Here's who you are. And more importantly, here's who you're not. And we want to give our kids that kind of equipment so that they can be world ready and so that they can be world changers and so that they can go and spread the gospel. And I think many people, they don't know who they are. Back to that identity thing.
Right.
And identity is going to be huge in this process of discipleship. So, like, basically, what is a disciple? Let's talk about the identity of a disciple, build that out and flesh that out and talk that out and live that out and go out to the world, and hopefully we can replicate and multiply what we're after.
Amen. Amen. I'll just add one more piece to that, if I may, as kind of the maybe the resident millennial here. But I would say I think one thing for me that I have, as I evaluated how I learned, it is through relationships. It is in mentorship. I do enjoy taking classes. I do enjoy reading books. But I think the times that I really solidify some of my beliefs are when I have conversations with people. The person that really got me into apologetics was a relationship that I was meeting with somebody every single week and bringing questions to him and saying, how do you answer this? How do you answer this? How do you
Yeah.
answer this? And he was just willing to sit with me and give me the answers that he had, and we could do research together. And so I think a discipleship process has to be oriented to relationships
Yes.
and in that. And I think sometimes we've kind of as a church, we have kind of set that aside and just said, oh, well, we'll provide a class or we'll have a small group or we'll do a seminar. And then that's kind of it. And we've kind of checked that discipleship box. But I think for Christians in general, it's more of, again, this is a very new age term, and I'm just going to hijack it for a second. It's more of a,
Great, Tim. Just cancel out all of our
right.
OFA subscribers, right?
No, it's more. It's more. The term I was going to use was mindset. It's a way that you think about relationships and think about pouring into somebody else than just creating a full set of curriculum. And curriculum is good, and we need that. Videos are good, and we need that. But think about like we were saying with the mental health crash course, think about taking it with a group of people. Think about, I have suggested a number of times to watch a 1 minute apologist video in a small group or in a youth group and then just discuss it,
Yep.
because that's gonna help that stick more than just watching a video and then kind of leaving it at that. Yes, you get the answer, you get a quality answer, a credible answer, but when you do it in a group and then you have a discussion about it,
That's right.
that starts to really stick. It starts to think about, it starts to really pull that down. So again, that was
Yeah, I
my,
mean,
my
think
two
about what you're
cents.
saying, how important it would be, that you get what you get. So you learn, like, on Sunday, let's say,
Hmm.
and then you go talk about it with your family over
Yeah.
lunch. But then when you go to school or you go to work, you look to articulate it there.
Yeah.
Well, that articulating process allows your learning to be reinforced, but then you're also spilling what you've learned. And that's so important, that we spill what we've taken in.
Yeah. So let's move on to this last one and then we'll kind of wrap it up with some final thoughts. And I think this one is kind of a culmination of all of these. It puts all of these different pieces together. It says the church must reframe the notion of outreach and faith sharing with the next generation. And we've talked about this before on the channel, and a number of a large apologists have talked about this study that came out, I think, through Barna as well, that there's a significant amount of people in these particular groups, Gen Z and millennials, that believe that sharing the gospel, sharing the truth of Jesus Christ is on some level immoral, right? They think that it's wrong to kind of share that truth statement. So how would we reframe just the act of sharing our faith
Hmm.
so that people don't feel like it's wrong to do?
Yeah, I would say, um, I, and you're right. I mean, the Barna Group said nearly half of millennials and Gen Zs think it's immoral to share the gospel.
Right.
The question that I would ask then is, well, why is that? And I think some of that's influenced by their frustration of hearing their, adult generation preach the gospel, but not live the gospel.
Yeah.
And so, hence, what do we often do? The church is addicted to going from one extreme to the next. So it's all preaching, but the emerging generation wants to say it's all social justice,
Right.
it's all activism, and you're gonna equally miss the point. And I'm going to be honest, if you had to pick one, I'd rather share the gospel than just do social justice. But I don't have to pit myself one against the other because the Bible calls us to do both.
Right, right.
I've done some philosophical thought on this, and this is what I think's happening. This is what I think needs to happen, I should say. If we're going to reach the millennial and Gen Z generation and give them a passion for why they need to share, we need to connect it to their activism.
Mm,
We need to validate that activism's good, but we need to be able to say things like, listen, you can be passionate all day long about wearing your mask. Go ahead and wear your mask. You know that. Be respectful of others. No problem, because you're passionate about protecting somebody else from getting COVID-19. But understand the hypocrisy then of I'm not going to tell somebody about Jesus Christ and how they can get their soul cured
right,
and saved before Jesus. Uh, I think that that's equal hypocrisy. I'm just going to live, that's social gospel.
right.
And so, what we need to do is we need to help them to see that sharing the gospel is a form of activism.
Yeah.
And if we can help them to see that, then maybe we can ignite the passion in them to share. Uh, it lets me know also that millennials and Gen Zs aren't reading their Bibles. They're listening to social media and watching social media because if they're reading their Bibles, you can't get away from the inescapable truth that there is a great commission and we are commanded to share the gospel. We're commanded to do this. That's what Jesus left us with.
Right.
Jesus, yes, he did social justice. He healed. He took care of people. He fed
Yeah.
the poor.
Right.
But he shared the kingdom of God. And if we miss that, then we miss Christianity. And so we need to make sure that we figure out a way to deal with these 5 things in the church if we're going to be effective in reaching them and keeping them in the church.
That's exactly right. So I hope we gave kind of a walkthrough of these different perspectives and how we think they're an issue and how you can address them. Bobby, in conclusion, why don't we try to wrap up some of this with some maybe practical ideas and how we, as at Image Church, hope to kind of navigate through some of these things.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm in a church planting situation. So what I'm doing is I've identified these 5 issues, or I should say, I'm embracing these 5 issues and validating them and saying, yes, we need to hammer this. We need to really be about this. This is really important. And I think it's important whenever you see a list or hear a list to think, well, should there be anything else there? And go to the millennials and Gen Zs and say, what's missing on this list? Do you validate this list? But this is a great conversation point. I've talked to my kids about this list already. I've got my own 2 Gen Zs at home. And I think it's important that in the church, then we figure out how our student ministries going to address this. And I think how also are we going to address this on Sunday morning worship as adults? If I was to add one point to this list, it's this. I think that if we're going to keep these young emerging leaders in the church, we need to give them opportunities while they're young.
Yeah.
So like right now, I've got 2 Gen Zs. As you know, we're doing a virtual service this weekend at Image Church, and my daughter is singing a couple songs. My son's going to be doing the announcements. We're looking to put them on the platform instead of thinking, oh, I got to be an adult before I can come into big
Right.
church.
Yeah.
We want them up on the stage when they're young so that they have some ownership, so that they feel a part of, so they don't feel like they're irrelevant. And so I think that that is a huge thing. So if I was to add number 6 to the list, it would be get these young ones some responsibility as greeters, as leaders, getting up on stage, singing. My son, I utilized him recently in a teaching moment. I'm going to be doing more of that. He feels a call to do some of that.
Yep. Yep.
I'll bring him up and have him share part of this messages with me. He's 19. That's okay.
Yeah.
Let the kids fumble. Let them make mistakes. Heck, I'm 47 and I'm still fumbling my way through this thing called life.
Me as well. Me as well. Yeah. Yeah, totally, totally. And I think that's great. I mean, that's one thing that I'm excited about. the culture at Image Church to be, and something that I think if I look back on my life, but yes, I was given opportunities to be involved and to lead in the church, but I think that there was a number of times when I wanted to do things that I was told I couldn't do that because I didn't have a certain title or certain education
Yep.
or whatever it is, and just so longed for that mentorship, that discipleship that we are talking about earlier, and then the opportunity to be able to fail and to get up on stage or to lead something. And
Celebrate their failures.
yeah,
Hey, it shows that they risked.
right,
It shows that
exactly,
they stepped out there. It shows that they tried.
right,
It's okay. You know, the other thing, Tim, I would say for people, if you're out there and you're watching this and you're kind of like, in total shutdown and can't go to church, check out our Image Church virtual Facebook launch team page, and you can be a part of these virtual services, and you can see how we're building something from scratch and
yeah.
putting this together.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So, with that, any final closing comments or thoughts?
No, just thank you seriously for your time. There's a lot of places that you could have invested your time, and it seriously means a ton that you would just drop on. We appreciate all of your feedback as well, and we just hope that you'll join us each week in these discussions.
Yep, amen to that. All right, and with that, we will see you on our next live stream. My keyboard, man, my keyboard's not working, so I'm gonna have to get up and head on over to the
This is
computer.
going to look really
So,
clumsy, Tim, and I'm going to celebrate your failure.
yeah, it's okay. I might just be too far away from the Bluetooth, so that's okay. So we're gonna end, but I'm gonna get up and I gotta walk over to the
That's
computer.
right.
So we'll do this.
Join us for this conclusion of awkwardness.
Right.